Have you ever felt like your very reality was being silently erased by someone who claims to love you? These 12 signs are more than warnings. They are emotional traps in disguise, capable of destroying your self-esteem, draining your sanity, and imprisoning your soul. Don't ignore what could be the beginning of a cycle of abuse. Watch for it before it's too late. Silence, seemingly harmless, is the first symptom that something is terribly wrong. In a healthy relationship, silence can signify respect, space, and reflection. But in a toxic relationship, it becomes a lethal weapon. Unhealthy silence is calculated, sharp as a blade, used not to soothe, but to control. Imagine seeking dialogue, reconciliation, a chance to understand, and on the other side, a silent, icy abyss filled with contempt. Punitive silence doesn't solve the problem. It destroys. It accelerates the heart, paralyzes the mind, and creates an environment where even the air seems heavy. The victim walks on eggshells, blaming themselves for something they can't even identify. And when silence speaks, it says, "You're not worthy of a word." This behavior isn't neutral. It carries an implicit and poisonous message. You don't deserve it. It's punishment disguised as distance. The lack of response becomes an emotional punishment that gradually shapes the victim's behavior. They learn that any failure, real or imagined, can cost them days of coldness. The abuser, in turn, feeds on the other person's control, their supplication, and their insecurity. And the more the victim tries to please, the more cruel the manipulation becomes. The second sign is the use of love as a bargaining chip. Affection that should be free and genuine becomes priced. Obedience. To earn affection, one must give in. To receive a hug, one must give up oneself. Over time, love stops being comfort and becomes blackmail. If you loved me, you would do this. I can't be affectionate when you act like this. Phrases like these mask a cruel pattern, conditioning affection to submission. The victim begins to live emotionally thirsty, waiting for crumbs of affection, like someone begging for air. Love becomes an elegant prison. But the most subtle and destructive trap is gaslighting, the editing of reality. The abuser rewrites stories, distorts facts, denies events, all to make the victim doubt their own sanity. Little by little, they stop trusting their own senses, emotions, and memories. A betrayal becomes a misunderstanding. A cry becomes worry. Pain becomes drama. When the truth is manipulated, the victim loses not only their freedom, but their identity. They become hostage to the version the other imposes, and worse, they begin to believe it. The fourth sign is the perfect image maintained in public. The abuser is kind, charismatic, charming in front of others, but behind the scenes, they are cruel, manipulative, and calculating. This creates an invisible prison. Who will believe the victim when everyone sees an exemplary partner, and then she falls silent out of fear, shame, thinking no one would understand? The loneliness intensifies, the external silence reinforces the internal silence, and the pain is camouflaged by forced smiles. This contrast between the dream couple and the brutal reality of the relationship serves a single purpose: isolation and discredit. Friends, family, and colleagues, seeing through the abuser's social mask, doubt the victim. Comments like, "He seems so good," or "Maybe it's just a phase," delegitimize the suffering. And when the truth is denied even by those around her, despair sets in. The victim feels that even if she screams, she won't be heard. The sixth sign is the emotional roller coaster. After periods of extreme coldness, the abuser returns with gestures of affection, as if nothing had happened. This alternation between affection and abandonment creates a devastating psychological dependence. The victim begins to live to please, hoping to prolong the rare good times and avoid the long silences. It's a vicious cycle, fueled by illusions. One day, a hug, the next, the abyss. And so, day after day, she learns that love demands sacrifice and that suffering is the price to pay to be loved. 7. Conditioning through sexual intimacy. The body, which should be a space of trust and connection, becomes used as a bargaining chip. Caresses are granted only when there is obedience. Relationships are avoided as punishment. Intimacy becomes a tool of control and desire, currency. Pleasure becomes a reward, rejection, punishment. Love once again loses its meaning and turns into oppression. The 8th sign is veiled social restriction. The abuser suggests or demands that the victim distance themselves from friends, family, and colleagues. They say it's out of jealousy, protection, or love, but the truth is they want total control. Each friendship severed is one less voice that could warn. Each avoided visit is another broken link with the outside world, until only they and the silence are left. 9. Constant blaming. Everything is the victim's fault. If the abuser explodes, it's because they provoked him. If they cheat, it's because they didn't pay attention. If they pull away, it's because they overreacted. Manipulation makes them constantly question themselves, carrying burdens that aren't theirs. Guilt eats away at their heart until they convince themselves they deserve every punishment, every abandonment, every silence. The 10th sign is the denial of the victim's emotional reality. Their feelings are delegitimized, ridiculed, or ignored. They hear phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "It's all in your head," "You always exaggerate." Over time, they begin to hide their feelings, afraid of being labeled weak or problematic. And when they can no longer trust even their own emotions, their soul becomes sick. 11. Subtle but constant emotional blackmail. If you love me, stay with me. If you leave, you'll end up alone. Without me, you're nothing. These threats aren't shouted, but whispered sweetly, hidden between the lines. They create a prison without bars, but with high walls, invisible to those on the outside, insurmountable to those on the inside. And finally, the 12th sign, the loss of their own voice. After so much distortion, blame, and silence, the victim can no longer express themselves. They no longer know what they think, what they feel, what they want. Their identity has been shaped by the other, their desires erased, their opinions suppressed. She no longer speaks, she merely reacts. She no longer lives, she merely survives. When the victim loses her voice, it's not just external silence, but an inner muteness imposed by fear and the repetition of pain, the fear of being judged, the fear of not being understood, the fear that speaking out will only make things worse. And this fear grows silently until it stifles any attempt at self-recovery. She learns to be silent before even trying. She learns to smile to hide it. She learns to survive without living. And this adaptation to suffering isn't strength. It's desperation disguised as resistance. And herein lies a crucial point: the naturalization of emotional violence. When these 12 signs become routine, what is toxic begins to seem normal. Silence becomes respect for space. Blackmail becomes proof of love. Control becomes care. Guilt becomes self-criticism. The victim begins to interpret the abuse as a problem she needs to solve herself. The relationship becomes a jigsaw puzzle whose pieces never fit together, and yet she insists on putting it together every day, believing she's at fault. The toxicity at this stage becomes almost invisible, and that's precisely why so many victims remain trapped for years, unaware that they're slowly being destroyed. They deny themselves to maintain the balance of the relationship. They begin to control what they say, how they dress, who they see, what they feel. Every step is calculated to avoid the next conflict. Freedom is given up in exchange for crumbs of peace. But this peace is fragile, artificial, conditional. All it takes is a small gesture outside the script imposed by the abuser, and everything falls apart again. And when the victim finally tries to leave, they often face the cruelest of obstacles, the abuser's shifting of blame. He assumes the role of victim, cries, begs, promises change. He says he made a mistake because he loves her too much, because he was confused, because he was pressured. The pain he himself caused becomes an argument to keep the victim close. This emotional manipulation is a sophisticated trap. It plays on the victim's empathy, the hope they still harbor, the genuine desire to save what once seemed like love. And it is in this emotional game that many relapses occur. The victim decides to leave but returns. They try to break free but give in. Because manipulation isn't just about control, it's about emotional reprogramming. The abuser, consciously or not, turns the victim's mind into a battlefield. They begin to fight against their own feelings, their own perceptions. What is real becomes confused with what was induced, and this destroys the foundation of emotional sanity. Furthermore, there is a factor that is often overlooked, the physical symptoms of emotional abuse. The victim begins to somatize all this tension. Insomnia, constant headaches, anxiety attacks, palpitations, shortness of breath, digestive problems, and weakened immunity. The body screams what the mouth can no longer say, and yet they try to carry on. They go to the doctor, take medication, seek therapy, but return home to the same toxic environment as if nothing has changed. This repetition causes profound wear and tear. The sparkle in their eyes fades, energy drains, self-esteem dissolves. They no longer recognize their own image in the mirror. And the frightening thing is that this process is not immediate. It happens day after day, word after word, silence after silence. It is a slow, silent erosion, invisible to others, but brutal on the inside. Another aspect that aggravates emotional imprisonment is social judgment. There's still a lot of taboo and ignorance surrounding abuse that doesn't leave visible scars. Society often only recognizes violence when there are screams, bruises, or complaints. But emotional violence is like poison in small doses. It kills slowly, but it kills. The victim feels that if she tells her story, she'll hear cruel questions. But he never hit you, right? Aren't you exaggerating? Isn't it just a relationship crisis? These phrases, often said even with good intentions, are devastating. They cause the victim to isolate herself even further. She learns that no one will understand, no one will believe, no one will help. And so she falls silent again. She accepts the role of unshackled prisoner, believing there's no other way out. The abuser, in turn, senses this silence and uses it as fertile ground to further deepen her control. And at this point, another dark facet of the toxic relationship emerges: the emotional dependence built by the abuser. The abuser becomes at once the poison and the antidote, the cause of the pain and the only possible cure. The victim feels they can no longer live without him. Their identity has been so shaped by the relationship that any idea of autonomy seems frightening, impossible, even dangerous. The world outside the relationship seems threatening, and the abuser, however toxic, seems safer than the unknown. This is why so many victims take so long to leave. It's not weakness, it's emotional imprisonment. It's the sum total of fear, guilt, confusion, manipulation, and isolation. It's such a complex and deep-rooted network that breaking it requires not only courage, but a true internal rebirth. And this is where the awakening of consciousness comes in, the most important and, at the same time, most difficult moment of the entire process. When the victim begins to realize they're not crazy, that they're not weak, that they're not guilty, something changes within them. It's like turning on a dim light at the end of a tunnel that seemed to have no exit. It's a spark that over time can become a flame. This awakening can come through a sentence, a video, a conversation, a solitary tear in the middle of the night. It can come slowly, as doubt, or abruptly, as a revelation. But when it does, it's impossible to ignore. Awareness begins to piece together the scattered pieces of truth. The puzzle finally begins to make sense. The 12 signs, once isolated, are now seen as an entire system of domination. And most importantly, the victim understands that this isn't love, it's abuse. The awakening of consciousness is painful because it requires courage to see everything that has been denied for so long. It's a deep dive into one's own wounds, a confrontation with hard truths that were previously ignored in the name of fragile hope. But this process, though arduous, is the first step toward healing. It's in this process that the victim begins to remember who they were before the pain. They begin to reclaim their desires, their voice, their limits. For the first time in a long time, they ask themselves, what if I don't deserve to live like this? This question echoes like a whisper at first, but over time, it transforms into a scream. The scream of someone who no longer accepts a life shaped by manipulation, of someone who understands that love cannot coexist with fear, of someone who recognizes that a healthy relationship doesn't require submission or sacrifice of identity. Awakening is the moment the victim looks in the mirror and, for the first time, sees themselves beyond the pain. It's the moment they realize freedom isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. But this awakening also brings an avalanche of challenges. The first is the guilt of wanting to leave. The manipulation is so profound that the victim wonders if they're being selfish, if they're abandoning someone who needs them, if they're overreacting. The abuser, sensing this emotional weakness, may escalate the game, crying, promising, saying they'll change. And once again, they place the responsibility for the relationship on the victim's shoulders. This cycle is so perverse that even in the process of liberation, they still feel guilty for not being able to save their partner. This guilt, however, needs to be understood as part of the prison. It's not the victim who destroyed the relationship. It was the abuse. It's not the victim who's giving up. It's the victim who's rescuing themselves. This distinction is vital for the breakup process to move forward. Because leaving a toxic relationship isn't simply about walking away. It's about breaking invisible bonds, facing deep fears, and rebuilding yourself amid the rubble left by years of pain. The second challenge is the fear of the unknown. After being molded by the abuser for so long, the victim often feels like they won't know how to live alone. They fear loneliness, rejection, and instability. They fear not being loved again. And this fear is exploited by the abuser until the very end. You'll never find someone like me. You'll regret it. No one will accept you the way I did. Phrases like these aren't just threats, they're mental poison, but while they hurt, they reveal something important. The abuser knows they're losing control, and losing control is the abuser's greatest fear. Because, without emotional control over the victim, they lose the power that fueled them. Therefore, the breakup phase is often the most dangerous. It's when the abuser may resort to extreme measures to try to maintain the bond. They can become even more manipulative, more violent, more seductive. They may try to win back with gifts, theatrical gestures, declarations of love, all to try to erase the signs, reverse the awakening, and trap the victim back in the cycle of pain. Therefore, it is essential that the victim, upon recognizing the signs, seeks support. Real, safe, consistent support. This could be a therapist, a support group, a trusted friend, or a caring family member. Leaving a toxic relationship alone is possible, but with support, the path becomes clearer and less painful. Because in these moments, doubt still haunts. There are still days when the victim thinks about going back, giving in, letting go. But with someone by their side, holding their hand, the chance of staying strong increases. The third challenge of awakening is relearning how to live. After so much time being dependent on another, the victim needs to reconnect with who they are. They need to relearn how to make simple choices, how to say no without guilt, how to feel without fear. They need to rebuild their identity, their dreams, their values. And this reconstruction doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, painful, and sometimes lonely, but above all, it's liberating. In this process, many discoveries emerge. The victim realizes they can laugh again without fear. They can sleep without anxiety. They can leave the house without having to ask permission or justify their actions. They can have friends, desires, and goals. Each small achievement becomes a symbol of rebirth. Each choice made voluntarily is a celebration of freedom. And in this new scenario, something that had been stifled begins to flourish: self-love. This self-love, when rediscovered, is the greatest shield against relapse. It strengthens the victim, gives voice to their intuition, and rekindles the light of dignity that had been extinguished. It teaches that true love never hurts, never imprisons, never nullifies. It teaches that there's no need to beg for affection, beg for attention, or justify one's existence to someone else. Self-love is the ground where new life is born, a life where peace replaces fear and respect replaces control. And when this self-love strengthens, the victim finally understands that the toxic relationship was never about love. It was about power. The abuser didn't love. He possessed. He didn't care. He watched. He didn't protect. He isolated. And recognizing this truth, however painful, is the definitive step toward liberation. It's the moment when the victim doesn't just leave the relationship, they free themselves from it. But the process doesn't end there. The fourth challenge is dealing with the scars left behind, the trauma, the insecurity, the anxiety, the distrust. All of this lingers for a while. They are emotional scars that, though invisible, hurt. But unlike open wounds, scars tell a story of survival. And each day, the victim chooses to live without fear. They become badges of courage. The journey of those who have survived a toxic relationship is marked by losses, yes, but also by rebirth. And when awareness takes hold, when the pain is acknowledged, when self-love blossoms, freedom ceases to be a distant dream and becomes a possible reality. A reality built with tears, but also with strength, with pain, but also with hope. The process of rebuilding after a toxic relationship is as challenging as the awakening itself. Once out of the cycle of abuse, the victim finds themselves facing a new world, both frightening and at the same time full of possibilities. And it is at this moment that the fifth great challenge arises: the rediscovery of one's own identity. Who am I without this relationship? What do I truly like? What do I believe? What are my limits? Simple questions for those who live freely, but painful for those who spent years being shaped by the expectations and demands of an abuser. It is common for the victim to face periods of emotional instability after leaving an abusive relationship. Conflicting emotions arise constantly: relief and longing, freedom and loneliness, courage and fear. It is an internal battlefield where the past still tries to pull at the shadows while the future calls silently. Many believe that leaving will resolve everything. But the truth is that the real work begins after leaving. It is in rebuilding that the victim tests their strength, resilience, and ability to love themselves even while carrying deep scars. This phase requires patience. It's one step at a time. There's no rush to find yourself again, because every part lost throughout the relationship needs to be gathered, revisited, and reinterpreted. And often it's necessary to start from scratch, relearn to trust yourself, your own decisions, your own judgment. The abuser planted so many doubts, distorted so many truths, that now the victim must relearn how to differentiate intuition from trauma, instinct from fear, security from control. On this path, self-knowledge is an indispensable ally. Therapy, support groups, reading, spirituality, writing exercises, self-care practices, everything that reconnects the victim with their essence is welcome. Because rebuilding is more than just getting back on your feet. It's reinventing yourself consciously. Not just recovering what was lost, but understanding why that loss was possible. And from this clarity, create new patterns, establish new boundaries, cultivate new types of love, starting with one's own. And it is at this point that an important phenomenon emerges, the recognition of family or social patterns that contributed to the cycle of abuse. Often, what the victim experienced in the relationship had already been experienced in part in childhood, adolescence, or in old friendships. Growing up in environments where love is conditioned, where silence is used as punishment, where control is confused with care, can predispose someone to accept these same behaviors in the future. Therefore, healing requires a comprehensive review of personal history. This review can be painful, as it reveals that the problem didn't begin with the abuser. It was the culmination of old patterns, of unconscious repetitions, of wounds that never fully healed. And recognizing this doesn't mean guilt. It means emotional maturity. It's understanding that the victim didn't choose to be abused, but perhaps, without realizing it, allowed themselves to enter and remain in this cycle because they didn't know a different kind of love. And it is precisely this new love that now needs to be built from the inside out. In this healing process, something powerful happens. The victim transforms into a survivor. And more than that, into a witness and an agent of change. By recognizing manipulation, emotional abuse, and psychological traps, they develop a more sensitive, more conscious perspective. They begin to identify these patterns in other relationships, in friends, in family, in stories they hear, and often it becomes support for those still trapped in the cycle. The pain, then, stops being just a scar. It becomes a bridge. It becomes a warning. It becomes strength. But make no mistake, this new perspective also comes with losses. By freeing themselves from a toxic relationship, the victim may find themselves alienated from people who directly or indirectly reinforce the continuation of that relationship. They may lose friendships, family, even religious or professional circles, because not everyone can handle someone who chooses to step out of the submissive, silent, nice role. Many social structures are uncomfortable with those who stand up. But this loss is necessary, because maintaining ties with people who normalize abuse keeps the flame of the past alive. This choice to break with the old to make room for the new is an act of courage. It means saying no to everything that no longer nourishes, that no longer respects, that no longer adds up. And it also means learning to be alone without feeling lonely. Because there are times, yes, when the path to healing is lonely. But it is in this solitude that the greatest rediscoveries with oneself are born. When the external noise falls silent, it's possible to hear one's own voice. And this voice, though muffled for years, still exists. It still has strength. It still has truth. It just needs space to flourish, and as this voice grows, new possibilities emerge. The world, which once seemed threatening, now presents itself with different colors. The victim begins to realize that they can dream again, love again, create again, but this time with awareness, with presence, with self-respect. And this new life is so different from what was lived before that it frightens and enchants at the same time, because they finally understand that love doesn't have to hurt, that relationships don't have to be painful, that peace is a right, not a luxury. At this point in their journey, many choose to help others break their cycles, They tell their stories, they write books, they create projects, they produce content, they transform pain into a mission. And this is one of the noblest forms of resignification, when the wound transforms into light and suffering into purpose. Each shared story is a spark that can ignite the awakening of another sleeping soul. Each courageously spoken truth is a key thrown into the universe, and someone, somewhere, can use it to unlock their own prison. And so, the cycle of abuse gives way to another cycle, that of healing, awareness, and connection. A cycle that doesn't oppress, suffocate, or control, but that expands, embraces, and liberates. And this expansion is irreversible, because once consciousness awakens, it doesn't go back to sleep. The victim, now survivor, understands they deserve more and demands more. They demand respect, reciprocity, truth. And more than demanding from others, they offer themselves, every day, with love, with firmness, with compassion. When the survivor looks back and recognizes the journey she's traveled, something powerful happens within her. Pain begins to transform into wisdom. What was once merely suffering now carries profound lessons. And every tear shed, every sleepless night, every failed escape attempt takes on new meaning, not as failure but as resistance. Because staying alive, even in the face of emotional annihilation, is already an act of bravery. Surviving manipulation is a silent yet gigantic feat, and recognizing this strength is the beginning of the consolidation of healing. At this stage of the journey, the survivor begins to understand that freedom goes beyond physical separation. Freeing oneself isn't just about leaving the house where she lived with the abuser, nor about blocking their number on social media. True liberation lies in breaking mental and emotional ties, because the bond with the abuser, even after the relationship ends, can continue to exist invisibly. Longing, doubt, fear, guilt, all these feelings can still haunt her, trying to reactivate the cycle. But now she's different. Now she's aware. And awareness is the armor that protects her from relapse. The survivor learns that what she felt wasn't love. It was emotional dependence. It was the desperate need to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved. Sua interação pode salvar vidas, pode dar coragem a quem ainda está preso nesse ciclo de dor. But now, she understands that she doesn't need anyone's validation to exist. Her existence, in and of itself, is enough. She no longer needs to beg for scraps of affection. She doesn't need to diminish herself to fit into anyone's heart. The self-love she's cultivating teaches her that she deserves wholeness, respect, and balance. And with this new awareness, she begins to rewrite her story, no longer as a passive victim, but as the author of her own narrative. The woman who once remained silent now speaks. The one who hid now exposes herself. The one who was afraid now acts courageously. And this transformation isn't just beautiful, it's necessary, because her new version isn't a whim, it's a right earned with emotional blood and silent sweat. And at this point in her journey, she also discovers something even more revealing. She was never alone. By speaking, by sharing, by seeking support, she realizes that there are thousands of other voices echoing the same pain, the same fears, the same processes. Women, and men too, who lived years in silence, out of shame, or because they couldn't name what they felt. People who were disbelieved, silenced, judged, but who also awakened. They also broke through. They also rebuilt. This network of identification is the antidote to isolation, because when pain is shared, it divides, and when strength is shared, it multiplies. By hearing similar stories, the survivor validates her own experience, and she understands that the problem was never her. That emotional abuse is a social, psychological, systemic phenomenon. That there is an entire culture that sustains these cycles, from toxic romanticism to the patterns of submission taught since childhood. And understanding this is the ultimate liberation, because she stops blaming herself and starts fighting. Fight for yourself. Fight for those who came before. Fight for those yet to come. This fight is not waged with hatred, but with lucidity, not with a desire for revenge, but with a desire for transformation. And this is where pain takes on purpose, because the survivor doesn't just want to live, she wants to transform. She wants to break the cycle not only within herself, but also in the world around her. And this can manifest itself in many ways. Through activism, welcoming other victims, creating content, educating children emotionally, changing patterns in new relationships. Every gesture, no matter how small, is a seed planted against the culture of abuse. And this sowing is silent but powerful because it breaks generations. It transforms futures. But the survivor's journey also requires constant vigilance, because the scars left by abuse don't disappear overnight. They can manifest in new relationships, in moments of fragility, in emotional relapses. And that is why self-care becomes a daily commitment, a pact with yourself to never again accept less than you deserve. A daily reminder that your peace is no longer for sale. And at this point, one of the journey's most profound questions arises: how can I love again without repeating the cycle? How can I trust again if trust has been broken so many times? How can I open my heart without fear of being hurt again? These questions don't have immediate answers, but they bring to light an essential truth. The problem was never loving. The problem was having loved someone who didn't know how to love. Someone who used love as currency, as a weapon, as a disguise. Loving again requires caution, yes, but it doesn't require closure, because a heart that closes out of fear of the past becomes a prison, and the survivor wasn't born to be a prisoner, neither of the other nor of herself. True love will come, and it will be different. It will be light, it will be free, it will be reciprocal, because now she knows the signs, now she knows what she doesn't want, now she has criteria, limits, a voice, and whoever arrives to contribute will respect all of this, or will be just another who passes. This new phase of life, then, is not just a fresh start, it's a rebirth. The survivor, now conscious, doesn't return to who she was before. She is a new version of herself, stronger, more aware, more whole, and this is what bothers the aggressor most, knowing that despite everything she flourished, that even under rubble she put down roots, that even broken she rebuilt herself. And when she looks in the mirror, she may still see the scars, but now they tell a different story, not of destruction, but of resistance, not of submission, but of courage, not of emotional death, but of spiritual rebirth. And this story needs to be told. It needs to be heard, because it could be the flame that ignites the awakening of another imprisoned soul. There comes a moment when the survivor, standing before the mirror of her own soul, understands the most liberating truth of all. She is not what happened to her. It is what she chose to do with what happened. And this choice, made day after day, tear after tear, transformation after transformation, is what redefines her story. It is no longer about running from the pain, but about looking at it with unwavering eyes and saying, "You did not defeat me, I survived, and now I live." This is the moral of the story. No one is born ready to deal with manipulation, abuse, punitive silence, emotional blackmail. But everyone has within them the spark of conscience. And when this spark ignites, it can transform into fire, fire that burns away invisible chains, fire that illuminates hidden paths, fire that warms the wounded heart until it pulses again with hope. True love, the kind that liberates, can only be born when the ground is cleared of conditioned pain. It does not flourish in soil poisoned by lies, guilt, and control. Therefore, the healing journey is also a preparation for rediscovering love in its purest form, the love that begins within. When this self-love takes hold, no amount of blackmail, no silence, no distortion of reality can extinguish the light that now shines from within. And here lies the great question: why do so many people stay in relationships that diminish them even when they sense something is wrong? The answer lies in fear. The fear of being alone, the fear of not being loved again, the fear of not being enough. But what if the true danger isn't loneliness, but staying in a place that steals from you every day? What if the worst betrayal isn't the other person's but your own, when you abandon yourself to keep someone who should never have stayed? This is the message. You don't have to accept less than you deserve to avoid feeling alone. Your own company, healed and conscious, is worth more than any presence that hurts you. You were born to live with dignity. You were born to love freely. You were born to be whole, not half. Don't beg for love where there's only power. Don't accept crumbs when you're a feast. And above all, don't silence your pain to keep up appearances. Your truth has value. Your story matters. Your life is worth living without emotional chains. By recognizing the 12 signs, you take the first step toward breaking the cycle. By understanding that love isn't punishment, manipulation, or a bargaining chip, you rebuild your own definition of affection. And by freeing yourself, you don't just save yourself, you inspire. You become a beacon for other souls lost in the same fog. Because when one woman rises, she lifts many with her. May this video be not just a wake-up call, but a call to action. An invitation for you, who may be living in silence, to open your eyes, listen to your intuition, and realize that this life doesn't have to continue this way. There is a way out, there is support, there is life outside of fear, and it can be yours if you have the courage to choose yourself. Remember, recognizing is the first step, taking action is the second, and persistence is what transforms a scar into a story of overcoming. The journey won't be easy, but it will be yours, and that makes all the difference. Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, turn on the notification bell to be notified of our posts. See you in the next video.